Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and today I'm going to provide a video overview of how to use the new Olympus E-M5 Mark II, my favorite little mirrorless camera for travel and kind of casual photography. Just so beautiful and so much fun to use. I absolutely never mind carrying it around. If you have a different camera, or if you have a friend and you want to show them a similar tutorial for their camera, visit sdp.io/tutorials. Each tutorial is about an hour long, completely free and completely indexed. So if there's just one little thing you want to look up about a camera, you can jump right to it. You don't have to watch the whole tutorial. First up, we'll talk about the basics of it, assuming this is kind of your first camera, and then we'll go on and talk about more advanced things. So check the description. There's an index there that allows you to jump forward to different parts of the video. You don't have to sit through the whole thing. I will not cover every single feature of this camera. That's an important part of it. I tell you about the things that are important to photography, and specifically those things you need to know to work through my book, Stunning Digital Photography. But I don't tell you every little feature that I don't find all that useful, so there's some judgment there. But camera makers cram lots of features in their cameras that you never need to use and that won't improve your photography. So I won't go through the various artistic features because I would prefer to do that on my computer in post anyway, and I think most people prefer that too. Feel free to explore all the features if you want. I'll show you how to get started taking great pictures. Up first, how to work the physical controls of it, kind of the lens, the battery, and the memory card. Maybe you've already gotten through this, just check the index and skip forward. To attach and detach the lens, you'll push this button over here on the left. I should point out you might have a black version of this camera. They have different colors. I like the silver. When you go to attach a lens, line up the red dot here with the red dot there, and then just twist it clockwise until it clicks. And then I always give it a little counterclockwise twist, just to make sure it's locked in there nice and good. You'll also have to load a memory card in here. Pull this door back, and it should pop open. Now you can push the memory card in to pull it out. You'll see it goes in backwards. So the writing on the card will be facing the front of the camera. Just push it all the way in until it clicks, and then close the doors. You don't need to buy an expensive SD card. I would recommend just getting the cheapest SD card for this that you can. If you feel like you're going to be shooting a lot of sports, it's not really a sports camera, but if you're going to be shooting at that high 11 frames a second, then you might look at one of the faster cards. But I'd rather generally have a big 128 gig slow card than a smaller fast card. The battery compartment on the bottom is the last little door you really need to worry about. Flip the switch there and it pops open. Then you can pop the battery out. You'll have to bring your charger with you. If you're going to be out for, I don't know, even overnight, you'll definitely want to bring your charger with you. And one thing I recommend is it comes with this long power cord, but you can go on Amazon and buy a replacement power cord that goes right into the wall. I just hate traveling with that big long power cord. And just a little tip on how to make it easier to travel with this type of camera. It does not charge via USB, so you will need that battery charger. Now let's talk about the different ports on the camera. There are a couple of little ports here hidden on the side. So I'll pop this open, and over here we see, pull it right open at the top. The top port there is the microphone port. So if you're shooting video, this camera does have a microphone built into it, but that microphone will always give you terrible sound. You'll just get bad sound out of it. You won't want to record a concert or anything with it. It's workable, but you'll get much better sound if you just plug a mic in there. The second port there is the HDMI out port. And you could hook it up to an HDMI recorder and record video from it. Most people will just use that to hook it up to their TV to show their vacation pictures off to their friends. But most people will probably never use it. I almost never use them. And the last connector down there is a USB connector. You got a cable with your camera, and that's something else I never really use. Most people will connect it with the USB cable to unload pictures from their camera. But for me, I prefer just to pop open the USB slot over here, or the SD card slot, and then put this SD card directly into my computer, or I'll use a memory card reader. USB 3 card readers, if you have a computer that supports USB 3, will allow you to get to your pictures much faster, and that's always really important to me because I'm always excited to see my pictures. So now I'll cover actually taking a photo, and it's a pretty simple process. When your camera's off, you'll just hit the switch over here to turn it on. You can select a mode, and if you're unsure, we'll go over the different modes in a bit. If you're unsure, just select Eye Auto there. That makes everything fully automatic. And then when you're ready to take a picture, you can either hold it out and look at the viewfinder on the back to compose your shot, or you can hold it up to your eye. And in the default mode, it will switch between the viewfinder on the back and this viewfinder automatically when it detects your eye. If that's not working for you, there's this button right here labeled FN3. Just push that and that'll switch between automatic switching the viewfinder here and the screen on the back. So one thing you'll notice when you have it on automatic is when my hand gets near it, the screen shuts off. That can be annoying. So I almost exclusively use the viewfinder. So I'll tend to just hit that button so that it shows me the data on the back and then always shows me the viewfinder here in the sort of optical viewfinder replica. So when you actually want to take a picture, by default, you'll push the shutter button down here halfway and the camera will try to focus. And then when you're ready to take a picture, you'll push it down all the way to actually take the shot. Having a touchscreen, there's another really cool feature of the camera, and that's the ability to take pictures just by using the touchscreen. So if you're the type who looks at the back of the camera, this is really useful. So I'll just take a picture of that screen over there, and just by touching, it'll focus where I touched and take the picture instantly. And for casual photography, if you're just out at a restaurant with friends and you want to snap a picture, that's so great to just be able, you can hold it over your head and just touch the screen and take a picture. There's a little button there that shows a finger, and you push that to change the different modes. So when the finger has a little line through it, that means the touchscreen does nothing. It's not listening to your input. If you push it again, you'll see that green box. And what that means is it will focus when I touch it, but it won't actually take the picture. And if you push it, oh, there we go. If you push it again, now when it shows the finger and the shutter button, now it focuses and takes the picture all at once. Now, if you're ever using the electronic viewfinder here and everything is blurry and not coming into focus, but the screen in the back looks okay, that could be the diopter. The diopter is like a built-in glasses lens. I'm a contact lens wearer. If you wear glasses, you might want to take your glasses off and hold it up. Well, good news, you can adjust this for your vision and everything will seem nice and sharp without your glasses. Sometimes though, it'll get twisted and you'll look through the viewfinder and everything will be blurry and you're like, what's wrong with my camera? There's this diopter here. Just twist it. Twist it until everything is sharp. So this guy here, you'll just hold the viewfinder up to your eye and then you'll just twist it until like the numbers and the histogram and the display that you see in there, until they're all nice and sharp. Doesn't affect the picture taking at all, but it affects how you see and frame the picture. So now let's talk about the view options that you have. They're visible both when you're using the viewfinder and when you're using the display on the back. Let's get this focused in a little bit. You can cycle through different view options by hitting the info button up here. So as I push that, you can see now I have an electronic level displayed. You can see it's kind of showing me that my camera's leaning to the right, and now it's centered when it's green. That means it's level horizontally, and this bar over here is measuring the vertical off level. I'll push the info button again, and that goes away. Push it again, and now I have just a clean screen, which helps me compose without all that distracting information. So you can use the info button to decide what information you want to see during the course of shooting, and you'll see the same stuff when you're looking through the viewfinder. For me, I like to see the histogram. That's one of my favorite features of mirrorless cameras, is that I can see the histogram through the viewfinder when I'm actually shooting. So I like a little bit of those distracting elements, but if you're a purist and you don't want to see that, just hit that info button a few times and it'll clean the screen right up for you. Also point out this little guy right here. There's a little arrow coming out of the side of the screen. You can just swipe out, and in the automatic modes at least, it'll bring up a bunch of different settings that you can kind of scroll through and select. It's even got little shooting tips in there. I'm not going to go over all of those, but they're there if you ever want to explore them. Now let's talk about reviewing your pictures. After you've taken a picture and you want to actually take a look at it. So I'm going to take a picture of my producer Justin over here. He's working hard. So now you can see my man there, and it'll automatically review the picture, but if you want to see it, just push the play button down here. And now, because of the touchscreen, we can tap the touchscreen, and then there's a slider button right here. Grab that to kind of drag in, and then you can just use your finger to pan around. So it's good to, zoom in and check the eyes and make sure that everything is nice and in focus. I love having a touchscreen for that type of task. You can also use the touchscreen just to swipe back and forth. Oh, there's my dog Sandy. As you're reviewing it, you can see some options down here. There's the share button here. it marks the picture for sharing. Later, you can use the Wi-Fi button up here to go ahead and connect to your phone. That's not something I'll go through in this because, well, for one, people have different types of phones with different apps, and the Olympus app for your iPhone or Android phone tends to get updated, so it might change, so it could be confusing. But also, because Wi-Fi just isn't all that frequently used. I think everybody sets up Wi-Fi and uses it a couple of times, but the next time you're out with your friends and you want to share something on Facebook, I bet instead of taking a picture with your real camera and then going through the trouble of uploading it to your phone via Wi-Fi, I bet instead of all that, I bet you just take a picture with your camera phone. Because that's what I end up doing. It's just so much faster and easier that I don't end up using Wi-Fi a lot, and that's why I won't go into a lot of detail about it. If you click this button here in the bottom right, it takes you to the thumbnail, so you can see all the pictures that you've taken with the camera, and you can just scroll through them. It's super intuitive, and there's not much that you really need to worry about. So now let's talk about using my favorite mode, Aperture Priority. The aperture is the iris of the lens, the opening of the lens. And by opening that up, you let in more light and you blur the background more. By shutting it down for a smaller iris, you get the background more in focus, but you let in less light. So the camera kind of handles the amount of light that you're getting automatically by changing the shutter speed when you're in Aperture Priority mode. So to select Aperture Priority mode, you're going to select the A up here. And you can do that by twisting this dial until this black line lines up with the A. Now, this dial has a locking mechanism in it, which is so important. So if you want to lock it, you'll push it down until it clicks. And now you see I can't wiggle it. If you try to wiggle it, don't force it. Just push that center button until it pops up, and then you can change modes. So when I have it in A mode, Aperture Priority mode, the main dial will control the aperture. So I'll turn that off so we can see the camera settings. You can see them down here at the bottom. Right now it's at 1/500th of a second and f1.8. It keeps shutting off because it keeps detecting my hand in the way and thinks it's my eye. Okay, so here we can see it's at f1.8, and now if I move the main dial here at the back, I can set it to f5.6 or f8 or f16. So in this mode, in this behavior, the main dial here controls the f-stop number. Chapter 4 in Stunning Digital Photography covers f-stops and what they mean, so I won't duplicate that here. There's whole videos dedicated to it. It's a big topic, but it controls your depth of field. And in general, the lower f-stop number, the less background sharpness. The higher f-stop number, the more background sharpness. And you always want to shoot with the lowest f-stop number you can that gets your subject in focus, because that gives you more of the light that your camera really needs. In Aperture Priority mode, if you take a picture and it's too dark, you'll use this dial up here in the front to adjust the exposure compensation. So as I roll that forward, you can see the screen gets brighter. If I roll it left, the screen gets darker. We'll cover exposure compensation more in a little bit. I just wanted to show you where that dial was. So now let's talk about shutter priority. In Aperture Priority mode, when we selected it, this back dial controlled the aperture. In shutter priority mode, which I'll select now by turning this to S, oh, I have to unlock it first, S, now I'll control the shutter and the camera will control the aperture. So as I move this dial here, you can see now it's at 1/250th of a second. Now it's at 1/125th. And as they change the settings, you'll see the camera's also adjusting the f-stop number, the aperture, right next to it. And it's doing it just to give me the right amount of light to properly expose my picture. So you'll use shutter priority mode for sports, wildlife, any sort of action. And you'll always want to select the slowest shutter speed you can that freezes action, because slower shutter speeds let in more light. And again, letting in as much light as possible is going to give you the best quality images. So for a child running, for example, you might use 1/250th of a second. That's what I use for my daughter's soccer game. She's 11, so they're not that fast. 1/250th is usually enough to freeze the action. If you get into high school sports, professional sports, you might be more at 1/500th or 1/1000th of a second. You always want to use the slowest shutter speeds possible. So sometimes I'll take a few test shots and see what I really need to get clear, crisp images. If I'm shooting wildlife like a perched bird, I might shoot at 1/250th or 1/500th. But if I'm shooting a flying bird, I'm usually at 1/1500th or 1/2000th of a second. But for casual photography, taking pictures of people, portraits and such, 1/60th of a second is usually good enough. So now let's go over manual mode. Manual mode gives you control over both aperture and shutter at the same time using the different dials. The camera can still decide on the ISO, or you can manually decide on the ISO. Manual mode, as you might have guessed, is that big M there. So I'll just shift that over to M. And now in manual mode, the back dial here still controls the shutter, just as it did in shutter priority. But the forward dial controls the aperture. Now, you don't need to jump into manual mode. I know it's some sort of goal for everybody to be able to shoot manual mode. If you check chapter 4 in Stunning Digital Photography though, there's a whole video dedicated to how to use manual mode. I just wanted to show you specifically how to access manual mode and use these two dials to control the settings. We'll cover changing ISO in just a second. So now let's talk about bulb mode. Bulb mode is such an outdated name, but bulb mode allows you to do very long exposures. For example, sometimes with night photography, you'll need to do a 3 or 4 minute exposure. If you're in a rural area without moonlight, that's what it's going to take to get properly exposed pictures under starlight. And your camera won't use shutter speeds that long by default. So you'll have to use bulb mode. And to use bulb mode, usually I'll select manual mode and then scroll that shutter dial all the way to the left. You can see as I scroll left, now it's down to 1 full second. That's a really slow picture, but like I said, sometimes you need to go farther. I keep going left and left. And one nice thing about this camera is it lets you go to a full minute. Most cameras only do 30 seconds, but if I scroll left one more time from 60 seconds, a little quote mark means seconds, now it's showing bulb mode. And bulb mode means the shutter will stay open as long as I hold my finger on the shutter here. So I'll focus on something and hold it down. And you heard it click open. And now there's a little timer on the corner there saying 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 6 seconds. The screen got dim, I think because it might assume I'm at night, because that's the only time you'd use bulb mode. So I'll release the shutter now. And it processes the picture, and it's probably going to be a very bright picture because I'm in bulb mode. If you had to take a 2-minute exposure, you could theoretically hold your finger on that shutter button for the full 2 minutes. But that would be really boring, and you would certainly be shaking the camera, which would ruin your picture. So you will always use a remote trigger of some kind for bulb mode. So about that display getting dark, you can configure that from the menu. It does that because it figures if you're in bulb mode, it must be night, I think. So when you're in bulb mode and you open the menu, it'll take you to the live bulb display, which just controls how it displays the pictures back as it's taking them. But right here's the setting you want, the bulb time monitor. And this is going to control the brightness of the screen in bulb mode. So you can see by default it's set to -7, which just makes the screen about as dim as it can be. But you can make it brighter if you feel like it. The default is probably fine, because like I said, it's probably going to be night. So now I'll take a minute and just plug my books, Stunning Digital Photography. It teaches you photographic techniques, which are far more important than just figuring out the buttons and dials of your camera. The reason I make these videos is to help the readers of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, but I do offer them for free for everybody with the kind of goal of getting people to explore the art and science of photography beyond just the buttons and dials on a camera. Because you can get sharp pictures by learning the buttons and dials, but it will never teach you to pose and capture expression and control light or freeze motion. You'll never bring storytelling and mood to your photos unless you kind of study the artistic side of it. If you want to learn post-processing, if you find the pictures you have too many pictures and you can't find the ones you need, if you need something to organize your pictures and make them look a little bit better, maybe just crop them and make them a little prettier, the app you probably want is Adobe Lightroom. And I have a whole book that will help make Adobe very easy for you. It has 12 hours of video, so if you don't like books, you can just watch those videos. Stunning Digital Photography over here says it has 9 hours of video, but we're updating a version that will provide 12 hours of videos. And everybody who gets this version now will get those 12 hours of video for free when they're available. And finally, if you're interested in camera gear, understanding what all the features of your camera mean and how they're useful to you in photography, how to buy used gear, what the different aspects of lenses are and flashes and what you should look for, studio lighting, tripods, all of that is in my photography buying guide. Check them all out at sdp.io/store. Just look on Amazon. They have reviews and stuff there so you can see if they're good or not. Now let's talk about the shutter modes on the camera. Shutter modes are the difference between taking one shot when you push the shutter or taking 20, 100 shots continuously, and they're really easy to set. With a lot of things on this camera, you're going to access it via menus rather than buttons. To change the shutter mode, click the OK button here, and it will bring up this kind of quick menu. And then this item that's already selected, it just looks like a box now, and it says single up here. Just select that. That's the default single mode. And you have a bunch of different shutter modes here. So the diamond, when you see it, the anti-shock, means that there's a little bit of a delay before the camera takes a picture after you push the shutter. So it waits after you push the shutter and taking a picture. And this helps to eliminate the shock of actually pushing the shutter. And that's really useful if you're working on a tripod. It's probably not as useful if you're shooting handheld because your hands are probably moving anyway. The next option here, timed out for me, so I have to reselect it, has a heart. So anytime you see a heart, that means it's silent. And it's literally silent. It might be my favorite feature of this camera, the ability to take just pictures without anybody knowing. It allows street photography to be so discreet. Take a picture at a wedding. It means you're not annoying everybody around you. And you can take pictures of your kid's birthday party without everybody kind of being aware that they're being photographed. It allows for much more candid photography. And as an introvert, it's just a dream come true. Next, we jump up to sequential high-speed mode. And I'll show you how that works. It's really fast. I'll just point it over towards the camera over here. And this camera's so fast. 10 frames a second when you're in sequential high-speed mode. But there's a mode that's even better and even faster. And I'll go back into that same menu. Sequential silent. So it's the H with a stack of papers and the heart. The heart means silent. It's also like that. And now when I hold the shutter down, you can see it's taking pictures, but it doesn't make any sound. It's actually faster that way. It bumps up to 11 frames a second. That's the mode that I leave the camera in all the time. Because I don't mind if it takes 3 pictures when I'm taking a picture, even if it's just a snapshot, even if it's just a portrait. It's good to take a few pictures at a time because somebody might blink. They might make kind of a derpy face on the first picture. And if you grab 3, you can delete 2 of them. It doesn't need to take up any space, but the odds are that one of them is going to be a little bit better than the others. A few other shutter modes that I'll show you real quickly. Sequential low just takes pictures at a slower pace in case 10 or 11 frames a second is too fast for you and you don't want to have to sort through all those pictures later. You can slow it down a little bit. And then we have anti-shock low and silent low. And then we get into the different timers here. The timers are also available in silent and anti-shock, and that anti-shock timer is going to be really useful to you. So there's a lot of different modes here, but there's a 12-second mode that is useful for selfies. So I'll select the 12-second mode here, and usually you'll select the anti-shock mode. It's just better for that kind of thing. Imagine you have your camera on a tripod. If you want to take a selfie, first you'll probably flip this articulating display around so you can see yourself, and then you'll focus it on your family. You'll push that shutter button, and you can see now the timer is counting down from 12 seconds. That's the time when you run around the table, run around the tripod, put your arm around your kid, smile, and then it takes a picture. And then, of course, you run over and see if it worked, and your son probably put rabbit ears up behind somebody's head, and you have to take the whole picture over again. That's how you take a selfie. So I'll go in and show you a couple other shutter modes. Here we have the various 2-second modes. 12 seconds is for selfies. 2 seconds is for canceling out any shutter shake when you're working on a tripod. So if you're trying to take a really sharp picture, you'll use the 2-second delay. If you're taking night photography, that's what you will use. And then we have a custom self-timer, which just allows you to specify how long something other than 2 seconds or 12 seconds. So it can be 5 seconds if you feel the need, or something longer. So again, my favorite mode is silent, high speed. So I'll switch over to that. Now let's talk about the different focusing modes. Focusing modes control whether the camera finds a subject and locks focus, or keeps searching to track a moving subject. And it'll, especially on this camera, those different modes will have a drastic effect on how you take pictures. Usually you'll use single shot mode for still subjects like a portrait or a landscape, and you'll use continuously focusing mode for action and sports. We do cover all this in Chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography, but I'll show you how to select on this camera. And again, you're going to go click OK here and then access it with the quick menu here. And it's this item right in the middle is AF mode. And right now it's set to SAF, which is single AF, good for static subjects. And I'll click it, and then it gives me 5 different options in total. Single AF, continuous AF for sports, manual focus. You can use the ring on the lens to actually manually focus. And then two other options, which are single AF plus manual focus. That allows you to just grab the manual focus ring anytime you want and manually focus. Normally that's disabled just to prevent you from accidentally manually focusing if you don't know what you're doing. But for me, for most things on this camera, I'll use single AF plus manual focus. That's what works best on this type of camera. You also have the option of AF tracking. So there are several different modes here, but you don't necessarily need them all. What you do need are single AF plus manual focus. That's an important one. Manual focus itself, if you just don't want it to try to autofocus, or AF tracking here. I don't see any need to use SAF or CAF. AF tracking is what you'll use for sports and such. I will warn you, you probably won't have a high success ratio with the continuous AF and tracking. It can work for sports, but especially if you get into lenses with shallow depth of field, you'll find it's rather imprecise. Even if your subject is holding still, you'll see that continuous AF is going to be focusing in and out and kind of hunting. If you're doing a lot of that, you might consider switching over to a DSLR. It will work for some sports, but if you're heavy into that kind of thing, it could be a frustrating experience. And just know it's not your fault. Generally, you'll have better luck using single AF or manual focus on this camera and other similar mirrorless cameras. So now let's talk about how to configure the focusing point. So I'll switch this back into single AF plus manual focus, my favorite mode. The camera's pretty smart. It will search throughout the entire frame and try to identify what it thinks the focal point of your picture is. So if I point it at Justin over here, it will find his face and lock into it, and that's great. That will work most of the time. Most of the time you don't have to think about where to focus because the camera will pick it wisely. Sometimes though, you'll try to be taking a picture of something and it will lock focus on the wrong subject. When I took a picture of Justin, it decided to focus on the camera that was in front of him rather than his face. And that was annoying. Then I had to get it to refocus and do it a couple of times. So sometimes you want to take control of the focusing point. Very easy to do. By default, you can just push the directional pad here. And so as I move it, by default, all focus points are selected. If I just scroll it, it'll just come out of the side there. And now I could select, this is a good focusing point. You want the focusing point to be right on the person's eye, the near eye, if they're not facing you directly. So if you wanted a nice rule of thirds composition, you might put the focusing point all the way over here and then just click to select it. It's really convenient and easy to do. So even when you have your eye to the viewfinder, you can just push that directional pad around and move to a single focusing point. With this camera, most of the time I prefer to just let it focus itself. But again, sometimes it gets a little frustrating that it's not reading my mind and picking the right focusing point, so I prefer to select a specific focusing point. Now we'll talk about how to do manual focus just a little bit more. I have it in single AF plus manual focus mode, and you can see all I have to do is twist this right here. And so now it's wildly out of focus, and now it just comes into manual focus. But you can see I have focus peaking turned on. So as the manual focus screen there is in focus, it gets these yellow lines around it. And that's really helpful for making manual focusing more accurate. And because it's a mirrorless camera, you can attach an adapter and put on a wide variety of non-micro four thirds lenses on it, like your old 35mm SLR lenses can be attached to this. You won't get sharp results most of the time unless you really think it through, but you can do it, and in those cases you'd only be able to manual focus. So things like focus peaking are really, really helpful. It's also really helpful for video where you tend to think through your focusing ahead of time. I'll show you quickly how to control the focus peaking display and kind of customize it for your own needs. With the gear icon selected there, select AF/MF, the first item, and then go down to MF Assist, right on the first page of the A wrench icon, and go to the right here. And you can choose between a couple of different manual focus assist options. Peaking is what I was using, and you can turn it on or off. You can also do magnify, which for many people is going to be more useful. This zooms in so you can see every individual pixel and really get your focusing very, very precise. So I'll select that just to demonstrate how it works. With that turned on, I'll get back here into live view, and So now, look at that. As I start to focus, it zooms way in nice and tight. So here we are. Yep, you can see it just zooms in, and that allows me to get so precise with the focusing. I really love having it automatically zoom in like that. Could be annoying to you because you then can't compose the picture because you can only see a tiny part of it, but I find it super, super useful. One more manual focus setting that's useful is the direction of the focusing ring. So by default, it has it focusing like counterclockwise, but if you pick it up and you start to twist the focusing ring and it feels like it's going in the wrong direction for you, you're probably used to some other camera. You can just use that setting to switch it the other way around, and then it'll be more like the lens that you're used to working with. Now we'll talk about metering modes. Now in chapter 3 and 4 of Studying Digital Photography, I talk about metering modes, and I kind of tell you not to sweat it too much. I tell you just to leave it on the default setting and then use exposure compensation as necessary. And with this camera, I'll second that. I'll continue. I'll support what I said earlier in the book. Using exposure compensation is a more effective way than trying to change your metering modes because you get a live feed of what the brightness is going to be. So you could switch to spot metering or some other type of metering, but there's no scenario where I prefer to use that. But I will show you how to change it just in case you're curious. Again, I'll bring this up by clicking OK here, and then kind of scroll until I see the icon here 2/3 of the way down in the middle labeled metering. And this is what you want by default. ESP, I guess it's extrasensory perception. Maybe it reads your mind. I don't know. There's center weighted, which meters the scene around the middle like an old school camera would. Spot metering, again, like an old film day type thing when people couldn't preview their results right away and had to wait until it was developed. Spot highlight will just make sure that the part of the frame you're metering off of is not overexposed. It makes it as bright as possible. And then spot shadow will make whatever you have the spot meter on black, basically. So you can see when I put the spot meter over the dark part of the E there, the scene gets brighter because it's making that E black. If I move it down here to where the screen is white, it gets darker. Same with the spot highlight. It'll make the white screen pure white, or the black here as close to white as it can get. So I'll set that back to the default. Now let's talk about changing the ISO. ISO, which is not an acronym, it's not ISO, it's named after an organization that chose to use a 3-letter word to mean that means equality in Greek. They chose that as their name, but then for some reason that nobody understands, they wrote it in all capital letters. So everybody thinks it's ISO, but it's not. I called the organization, but you can look it up on their website. What it does is it controls the sensitivity of your camera to light. So with a high ISO, your camera will be able to take pictures in near darkness. With a low ISO, you'll use that when it's nice and sunny outside. Besides just controlling the brightness of the picture given a certain amount of light, ISO contributes the amount of noise in your picture. So a low ISO picture, like ISO 200, will be nice and clean, and everything will be nice and smooth and perfect. If you go to a high ISO, like ISO 6400, you'll see a lot of noise, little spots of red and green everywhere, and that'll make your picture quite ugly. So you'll always want to use the lowest ISO that you can for the conditions. But if you're shooting indoor sports, well, it's dim, and you need a fast shutter speed, so you're going to have to use a high ISO. But if you're outdoors, you'll always be using a low ISO. For me, nowadays, I use auto ISO pretty exclusively outside of the studio. And I would suggest you do the same, just use auto ISO. But you can choose to manually set the ISO, which is useful in manual mode for night photography. And I'll show you how to do that. Again, I'll click this OK button to pull up the menu here. And now in the upper left corner is the ISO setting. So I'll select that, and now I can just scroll left and right. Auto ISO is kind of what I recommend. Low here functions like ISO 100, but it's not a true ISO 100. What it does is it takes a picture at ISO 200 and overexposes it by a stop. So you lose dynamic range, which means some of the highlights could be clipped. That wouldn't be clipped in ISO 200. But it's okay to use it if you need a longer exposure, but it doesn't necessarily give you better quality images. Your base ISO is ISO 200, and that's what you'll use anytime you can, anytime you have enough light. So I'll go in, and like I said, I generally prefer to use auto ISO, so that's what I'll set it to. And until you understand ISO, just use auto ISO. It's just fine. The camera will always pick the best ISO that it can. Now I'll show you how to use exposure compensation, which adjusts the brightness of your picture. And the brilliant thing about mirrorless cameras like this is the electronic viewfinder. So you can see how bright your picture is going to be while you're looking through the viewfinder. So I'll focus on that distance screen again. And now I'll adjust the exposure compensation using the front dial here, this dial right here. And as I pull it to the right, we can see that picture gets brighter and brighter. And as I scroll it to the left, the picture gets darker and darker. So what you'll want to do with the exposure compensation is just think about the exposure of your picture right before you take it. And think, should this be brighter or should it be darker? And if it should be brighter or darker, move that front dial until it's the perfect brightness and then snap the picture. One of the tools that's so useful for determining whether a picture is bright enough is that histogram. So we kind of see it moving around there. And you'll just want to make sure that you have something in that kind of right third of the histogram. Like right here, you can see that screen is nice and white. Over towards the right, it's measuring how much brightness there is in the picture, how many bright parts of the picture there are. Over to the left are the dark parts of the picture. So like the dark parts up here are being represented by the left part of the graph. So if I kind of fill the frame with brightness, well, the camera's metering system tries to make everything gray. So when I move the camera over here, it adjusted for it. But I could use exposure compensation to bump it up. So now we see that histogram moving to the right as the picture gets brighter. As I move exposure compensation to the left, everything gets darker. That's all you do. You want a brighter picture, scroll that to the right. It's one of the most important aspects of photography. And the single biggest problem I see as I review people's pictures is it's underexposed, because people let their camera do all the thinking for them and they don't think, just twist that dial to the right a little bit, make sure my histogram is filled up, get a nice bright picture that's not overexposed. So now I'll talk about bracketing. I just showed you how to use exposure compensation to take a brighter or darker picture manually. Bracketing is a process that has your camera kind of do that for you. So it'll take a picture at what it thinks is the proper exposure, and then it will take an underexposed picture, and then it will take an overexposed picture. So by default, it'll take 3 pictures in a row at different exposures. Why would you do this if you can see the results instantly and kind of know what you want? Well, you probably never would. It was more useful in the film days when we didn't know if we were exposing it properly or not. Today, bracketing is most commonly used when you want to process your pictures with a technique called HDR. You want to take an HDR shot, you'll probably use bracketing, high dynamic range. Now this camera has an HDR mode built in. It is not very good. It's just not very good. You'll get much better results if you process HDR pictures on your computer using a tool like Photomatix Pro. So if you're serious enough that you're shooting HDR, you'll probably want to go ahead and get a third-party tool rather than using the software that's built into the camera, because once you do that, you can't ever kind of undo it. You might mess up your picture by shooting HDR in camera and you wouldn't be able to fix it later. To turn on bracketing, I'll hit the menu button. And then under Camera 2, the very first option here is bracketing. So I'll scroll to the right and just turn it on. Now it gives me the option, once I have on selected, to scroll to the right again. And now I can configure the bracketing options. For the most part, as I'm bracketing, well, first I only ever use AE bracketing. That stands for auto exposure bracketing. You'll see this camera gives you lots of other options like white balance bracketing, flash bracketing, ISO bracketing, and even bracketing for artistic styles. But for me, all I ever use is AE bracketing. And for the most part, all I'll ever use is, well, it's only giving me plus or minus 1 stop bracketing here. So you might want to go all the way to 5 stops at plus or minus 1 EV. So I'll select that. Now, if you go in and change the settings, make sure you go back and then select on, because I just accidentally changed the settings but left it turned off. So you actually have to go back to where it says on and then click OK. And you'll know it's good when you look at the little exposure compensation dial down here and you see those multiple little tick marks at 1 stop increments. There were 5 of them. That means it's going to take 5 shots. You can see it took a couple already, so it's blinking on the rightmost one. That's the shot it's about to take. So now I'll take some bracketed shots of Justin. So there, it took 5 shots, and as I play it back, You can see all at different exposures separated by one stop. This is the first one, then it went dark, and then it went overexposed. I could just pick the one that I like the best, or I could blend them together into HDR. After you're done with bracketing, be sure you go in and turn it off, because it's frustrating the next time you go to take a picture and it's underexposing or overexposing stuff for you. So always turn off bracketing when you're done with it. Now we'll talk about flash and flash exposure compensation. This camera does come with a flash. It's the cutest little bounce flash I've ever seen. You can tilt it up to bounce flash, as I discussed in chapter 3, or it's not the most powerful flash, so you probably have it pointed forward most of the time. All you'll do is you'll pull out the protector here. This is just a protector. You can, if you lose it, you can get one for $1 on eBay. And then slide this in all the way. You have to make sure it clicks. It takes like an extra push. When you're ready to pull it out, just push this button in and then pull it back. Make sure it's all the way in there. To use flash, turn your camera on and click the OK button here, and then this second button down on the left controls the flash mode. So you can see auto, red eye, which will just give a little pre-flash, fill flash, flash off. The fill flash there I talk about in chapter 3. It's tremendously useful for just adding a little bit of light. Now, when you take flash pictures, you'll often see too much flash, which is super annoying. It's a terrible effect. People are kind of blinded and their skin is all blown out. You can control that using flash exposure compensation. Flash is a good thing. You shouldn't be avoiding it completely, but you do need to learn how to use it. And the most important thing is just flash exposure compensation. So I'll click the OK button here. And then this third button down here says, right now it says +1. So that means it's going to meter the scene, see how much light it needs, and then add in as much flash as it thinks will properly expose your foreground. It's at 0 by default. But if you take a picture and it's too much flash, hit that flash exposure compensation and just dial it down. So for fill flash, I'm usually at -1.7 or -1.3. So now I'll take a picture of Justin over here. And you can see it metered the scene overall and then added just a little bit of flash. With a camera like this though, like I said, this flash isn't the best. It should be used for just kind of emergencies. Fortunately, it's not too big to bring around. But I usually try to work with natural light, and I'll show you how to get great pictures in natural light later with some fast primes like the one that I have on here. You can also get bigger flashes, bigger external flashes that will give you much more pleasing results than this little guy will. This is meant to be portable and used in emergencies. It's not meant to make the best pictures possible. Let me quickly show you how to set the white balance on this camera. Now, when you're inside and you're reading the newspaper will look white. And when you go outside in the sunlight, it still looks white. If you're in cloudy skies or a rainy day or you're under fluorescent lights, white stuff looks white to your eyes, but it's not really. That's your brain tricking you. No matter what light source you're in, your brain kind of automatically makes that color look full white. But they're all a little bit different. Fluorescent lights are a little green, and incandescent lights are kind of yellowish. So the camera tries to go through the same process that your brain does of figuring out what light source you're under and then making that white, and it has to adjust the entire picture. So if you take a picture and everything looks kind of yellow or orange or green, it's a white balance problem. And your camera will try to fix that for you. And if it doesn't, especially if you shoot RAW, which I'll show you in just a bit, you can go in and fix it in post. For me, I just take pictures in the RAW format and then fix it on my computer later. So I never worry about white balance in my camera. I have more important things to worry about, like composition and mood and expression, the more fun stuff. But if you do want to change white balance, I'll show you how to do it. Hit that OK button. It brings up your little quick menu here. And then white balance is right here at the top, the second thing in. It's at auto white balance, and that's where I always leave it. But you can adjust it for sunny days, shadows, cloudy days. Just pick the setting that looks like, there's even an underwater one. Whatever looks like your current scene, go ahead and set that. But when you're done, set it back to auto, just so the next time you're not taking pictures with really weird colors. Now we'll talk about recording video. And in many ways, it's exactly the same as taking a still photo, except you just kind of push a different button. There's a dedicated video button over here. And we'll focus on this boring subject. Focus, there we go. And then just push this button. And so now it's recording a video. This camera is so great for video because it has what they call IBIS, in-body image stabilization. that cancels out some of your handshake, even if you're using a lens that doesn't have image stabilization, like a fast prime. So it's a great excuse to use fast primes for video. It records 1080p 60, and that's what I would suggest you use for most situations. 60 frames a second is, and when you watch broadcast TV, it's at 30 frames a second. When you watch a movie, it's at 24 frames a second. 60 frames a second is twice as many frames, and it just looks great to the eye. It also allows you to slow the video down to 30 frames a second, so you can do slow motion effects. Really cool if you get into video editing, but even if you don't, shooting natively in 60 frames a second, if you can upload it to like YouTube and share it with your friends, it looks noticeably better. So I love shooting at 60 frames a second. That's what I would use all the time. I will show you just quickly how to go in and configure your video settings to make sure that you're using that. So I'll hit the menu button here. And then in the little gear settings, go to iMovie and select that. And so now we have a bunch of different settings, most of which you can just leave at their automatic settings. You can see it's controlling the audio, just says it is recording sound. You can set a limiter on the volume. Wind noise reduction is good if you're in the wind and using the on-camera mic. The movie specification settings option allows you to control how the video is recorded. So the first option here is what you're normally at, movie 1. And you can see by default it's at full HD. That means 1080p. HD is 720. So you can select between those two options. You can also select the compression level. Fine is probably fine. If you select super fine, you'll get bigger video files, but there'll be fewer compression artifacts. So that chunkiness you see in like a nice blue sky, that should be a nice smooth gradient, that's a compression artifact. And if you go up to super fine, it'll just look better. All infra is specifically made for editing video. It's a very high quality codec, and it's really nice to use, especially in something like Premiere Pro. That's what I would select for the type of work that I do. So you see some other movie settings here that allow you to add an effect to your movie. That means if you select black and white mode here, it will actually record in black and white for you. And then some other settings that allow you to control how exactly it behaves in movie mode. But for the most part, the defaults will be just fine. And the only thing you might need to worry about is making sure you have full HD selected. So now let's talk about, I already said something was my favorite feature. This is my real favorite feature, the high res mode. This allows this tiny little camera with a 16 megapixel sensor to take 40 megapixel images. And in my experience, in my testing, it beat my $3,300 Nikon D810 with a 36 megapixel sensor. Right now, it's the best camera in the world for still life photography, things like product photography. It produces images with intense, incredible detail that even more expensive 35mm cameras cannot match right now. You would have to get a medium format camera to match. Anyway, it's super cool. I'll show you how to turn it on. Hit the menu button here. And then right here under camera 2, you'll see this option for high res shot. And select that first menu item, high res shot, and then go down. And this first option, if you go to the right, it lets you select a delay. So the thing about the high res shot is there's a catch. You don't just get to take beautiful 40 megapixel images. What you get to do is you get to put your camera on a tripod, set it for like that 4-second delay, and then push the shutter and then wait 4 seconds without shaking the tripod or touching the camera, and that will eliminate any shake in the camera. To get that kind of detail, you need the camera to be just perfectly still. And then the camera is going to take a series of 8 images and then combine them together. In between each of those images, it shifts the sensor by half a pixel or a full pixel. So those half pixel shifts will allow it to extract more detail out of that smaller sensor. And those full pixel shifts will allow a pixel that only picks up blue to pick up red or green, allowing it to get more color information about each pixel. The results are amazing. All you really need to know is it doesn't work with any sort of moving subject. It only works with still subjects, and the camera must be on a tripod, so you have to be very deliberate about it. Even in landscape photography, it's probably not that useful because any sort of breeze will move every leaf, every tree branch, and what you'll see are lots of crazy artifacts. So if you're shooting landscape, go ahead and give it a try. Maybe the scene is still enough for it to work, but for the most part, you'll just want to take your regular 16 megapixel images or maybe shoot a panorama and combine those later. You'd have better results with that. I cover panoramas in stunning digital photography. So select 4 seconds or whatever the delay is. 4 seconds is my favorite. And then there's one other setting down here. If you're using a flash or strobe in the studio, I'll show you in my example if you look it up on YouTube of high-res mode. The flashes need a bit of time to recharge. So you'll need to set a charge time of 1 second or 2 seconds. Usually 1 second is just fine. I'm not using a flash right now, so I won't need to do that. But now that it says high-res shot 4 seconds, that means high-res mode is turned on. And I can exit out by half pushing the shutter. And then this isn't going to work because it's on a tripod, but for the sake of an example, you'll see the blinking high-res mode here. I'll just push the shutter, and it waits 4 seconds. And then it's going to start taking a series of pictures. There we go. So now it's taking multiple different pictures and combining them together. And what it ended up with was a weird blurry picture because it's not on a tripod. But if you have it on a tripod and a still subject, the results are just unbelievable. It's really fun to get that kind of detail out of it. So now I'll talk about formatting a memory card. You format a memory card and it erases all the pictures on the memory card, which sounds scary, but when you fill up your memory card and you've copied them all to your computer, you need to do that so you don't run out of space, or else you're just buying new memory cards all the time. To format a memory card, hit the menu button, and then under Camera 1, the very first item here, that's how important it is. They made it the first thing, Card Setup. Go to the right, and you can select between All Erase or Format. There's no real need to ever select All Erase, so just select Format, and it will prompt you to make sure, and when you select Yes, it'll erase all your data for you. And you'll have a brand new clean slate, be able to take lots of pictures. If you accidentally format and lose all your pictures, you can recover them as long as you don't take more pictures that overwrite the card. When you format them, your pictures aren't really gone. It's more like tearing the table of contents out of a book. The rest of the book is still there. You just have to go flipping through the pages for it. This is also a great way if you copy them to your computer and then your hard drive crashes and you're like, oh, at least I can get some pictures back off my memory card. You can recover them using a tool called PhotoRec. If you check out my Lightroom book, there's a whole tutorial on how to do that, or just Google PhotoRec. It's a free tool that's available for Windows and Mac, and I think even Linux. Then I'll talk about my favorite thing to do on any camera. The first thing I do anytime I get a new camera is turn off that awful beep. Oh, why do I need it to notify everybody that my camera has successfully focused? It gives you a visual indicator. You don't need that beep. So do everybody a favor and turn off that beep, especially if you're a guest at a wedding. As a wedding photographer, oh man, people have their cameras beeping all the time, just so disturbing. So the beep is accessible under the gear icon here, and then D. You even see like a dot with sound waves coming out of it. That's their symbol for a beep. So I'll scroll down here until we get to the beep, and then select that, and then just select off, and that will turn off that beep. Thank you, please do that. Now I'll talk about shooting RAW. This might be the most important setting for your photography. A RAW image captures all of the data from the camera's sensor. So you might think that all your pictures are all the data, but they're not. If you're taking a JPEG picture, the camera takes all the data from the scene and then kind of compresses it down. It throws away all the detail in the brightest parts of the picture and a lot of the detail in the dark parts of the picture, and then compresses it into a nice small file that's easy to share. But if you're an artist, if you want to make big prints, if you think you want to edit your photo later and get better results out of it, you'll get better pictures by shooting RAW, and it's really easy. The only downside to it is it takes a little more storage space. But nowadays, memory cards are cheap, disk drives are really cheap. I think everybody should shoot RAW. Even if you're not editing your pictures now, you might later, years from now. Maybe your grandkids will want to look at your pictures and they'll appreciate that you have these RAW files. They're processed pretty much automatically in a free tool called Picasa or a paid tool called Lightroom. And it's no more difficult to use. So I'll show you how to turn on RAW now. To switch to RAW, click OK. And then this bottom icon, second from the left, right now it shows LF. That means large, fine. So I'll select that. And now I can just scroll over to RAW. There's really no other reason you'd want to use these other ones, but if you, for some reason, sometimes like to use the JPEGs and want to keep a RAW file around, do LF plus RAW, but for the most part, you'll just want to shoot RAW. Now, this camera can be customized like crazy. Every single button and dial can do something different than the default, and as you get more serious, you'll really appreciate that because you'll find yourself constantly going in and switching between manual and autofocus or turning on bracketing. Whatever setting it is that you're accessing from the menus all the time can probably be assigned to one of the buttons or dials, and it can really make taking pictures faster and more fun. The one I like to customize first is this switch here. I just love this switch, and I like to set it to switch between autofocus and manual focus because there is no switch on the lens like there is on most cameras. So I'll show you how to do that, and you can decide if you wanted to do something different. So I'll click the menu button on the back to bring up the menus, and then we'll have to go down to button dial lever under the gears. And as I scroll down a little bit, you see the lever function here. I'll scroll to the right, and there are different modes. And the camera nicely describes each of the different modes for you. So you can see I have it in switching between AF and customized AF settings. That's not the mode I usually use though. So for me, I leave it in mode 5, which switches between autofocus and manual focus basically. But you can select other modes that change the behavior of the dials. If you're constantly setting the ISO, you could flip the switch and then move this dial to change the ISO instead of the aperture, for example. Just about all the buttons can be customized from those same settings here. For example, button function will allow you to control what FN1 does. Right now it's set to magnify on this particular camera. FN2 here switches the way I have it assigned to switch the two dials from controlling aperture and shutter speed to controlling the white balance and the ISO, because I'm constantly changing the ISO. So for me, when I have that selected, I just hold down the FN button and then twist this back dial, and it will change the ISO for me. Explore those different options. This isn't something you worry about the first time you pick up the camera. This is something you think about after you've had it for a month, and you realize all the different settings that you use most frequently and wish you could access them more easily. Now I'll show you how to take multiple exposure pictures. Basically, this is layering two images on top of each other. It's a trick from the film days, but it's a really artistic and creative way to kind of tell a story. And if you check the projects in Chapter 1, you'll see one of those, Chapter 1 of SDP, Studying Digital Photography, you'll see that one of those is a project about multiple exposures. So I just want to show you how to turn it on in this camera. Within the menu system here, under the shooting menu 2, little camera icon with a 2 there, you'll see the multiple exposure option here. You can just control how many frames you want to use, 2 frames, whether you want to do the auto gain feature or not. I will usually do that off, or the overlay feature is really nice. That gives you a preview of what the second picture is going to look like. So just wanted to show you where those menus are. Multiple exposures is something that required its own video, so it's something you should explore further, but it's a lot of fun. You'll also notice that the HDR option is right above it if you decide that you want to do HDR in camera. Also talked about just cleaning the sensor. If you decide that you want to clean the sensor, well, you don't always need to. It does a pretty good job of kind of cleaning itself, but every now and then you'll get a piece of dust on your sensor and it will show up in your pictures. Most often people see it in solid areas of blue sky. You'll just see like a weird gray spot in the sky that shows up in every single picture in the same spot. You want to clean the sensor, you can do that yourself. Some people send their camera off to the manufacturer. That's unnecessary. All you have to do is turn your camera off and remove the lens, and that exposes the sensor right there. You'll need a specialized tool to do it though, so check Chapter 5 in Studying Digital Photography. There's a video that talks about the gear that I use. There's lots of different equipment for cleaning sensors, but I've tested most of them and kind of settled on this one set of equipment. So check it out there and see what I recommend. I also want to show you how to store customized settings, because sometimes, especially with the customizing of the buttons, I know I will select what I want all the buttons to do, and then Chelsea wants the buttons to do something else, and that could get really time consuming if we were to hand the camera off back and forth. Fortunately, you can make all your settings and then save them in a memory bank that you can easily recall, so I find this pretty useful. The second item down on the first shooting menu here is Reset My Set. So I'll select that, and you can see Reset allows you to reset all the settings, or I have My Set 1. That's what I like to use. I've kind of changed them for this video, so I won't overwrite that. But if I wanted to save the current settings as My Set 2, I would scroll down there, go right, and then just click Set. And now the current settings are set. Now you just need to remember My personal settings are my set 1, Chelsea's are my set 2, and whenever you pick the camera up, go in and select that particular option for yourself. Now the way we use it is we assign a particular my set to a shortcut button that makes life a little bit easier. So again, to change the buttons, you'll hit the menu button, and then under the wrench icon, B, button dial lever, go to button function, and now you can select a button that you don't really use, like I don't use the HDR button, and then set it to your particular my set. Scrolling down here, there we go, my set 1. So I'll select that, and now when I'm back to shooting, I can just hit that button, and it switches it back to my preferred settings. You can see down here in the lower left, it says my 1. I'm going to suggest some tripods and lenses for your new camera. It probably comes with a kit lens, and use that for everything that you can. It does a good all-around job of taking pictures, but sometimes you'll find your camera isn't doing what you need it to do, and often you can fix that by buying a different lens for it. For example, sports, wildlife, close-up photography, portrait photography. These are all things that are improved with something other than your standard kit lens. Because this is a micro 4/3 camera, they participate in a system where lenses and flashes from different manufacturers are all compatible with the camera, and it's a fantastic system, and I wish Canon and Nikon and Sony could agree to a set of standards like that. The two most popular micro 4/3 companies are Panasonic and Olympus. We have both Panasonic and Olympus cameras, and we mix and match the lenses all the time. The biggest difference is that Panasonic lenses tend to have image stabilization built in, whereas Olympus lenses do not. That's because most Olympus cameras have IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, that stabilizes the shots with any lens. I love IBIS. The Panasonic cameras are kind of more video focused, so they would need the IBIS, but they just don't have it. So you can use Panasonic lenses on your Olympus bodies, and I do it all the time. But sometimes the Olympus lenses are a bit sturdier. They're kind of a hardier company and have similar image quality. But you'll see here, this particular lens is the Panasonic 12-35 f2.8, and it works just fine on the Olympus lenses. It has the image stabilization built in, which you don't need on the Olympus bodies. Most of the time, there's an equivalent in each system. So you can get the Olympus 12-40 millimeter f2.8 or the Panasonic 12-35 millimeter f2.8, and they're almost identical. They both have versions of this lens, the 20 millimeter f1.7. There's a Panasonic and Olympus version of it, and they're practically identical or interchangeable. So if you're buying new, you might as well get Olympus because the finish will match. The silver will look a little bit better. But if you're buying used and you find a better deal on a Panasonic lens, go for it. My favorite lens to use with this camera when I'm traveling out walking around is this lens, the 20 millimeter f1.7. And I have a Panasonic example here, but you can just get one of the Olympus versions. The original version, the Mark I, is a hair sharper than the Mark II, but they're each just fine. And this is equivalent to about a 40 millimeter lens in full frame format. And that means it's a great all-around lens. It's also very fast. It gathers like 3 times more light than your kit lens, which means in low light conditions, you're going to get much cleaner images because your camera won't have to go to such a high ISO. It's also nice and small. It's like a pancake lens, so it makes the camera really light and portable. And because of IBIS, it's also stabilized, so you can hand hold it with really slow shutter speeds. Another lens that we just love is the Olympus 45 millimeter f1.8. And this is a great, moderately priced portrait lens. You can find it much cheaper than $400 if you get it used. You can get one for like $250. And the reason I don't have one to show you here is that I'm filming with it right now. That's my 45 millimeter. But it's also just a great lens for headshots. It's small and light, quite sharp. Just my favorite lens for just carrying with me and taking quick snapshots and portraits of my family. If you get serious about portraiture and you want to get some real serious background blur and just intense sharpness, this might be the sharpest lens for the Micro Four Thirds system, is the 75 millimeter f1.8 lens here. It's expensive, but it takes like pro quality headshots, I would say. As a professional portrait photographer, you probably want a big zoom lens, and those are available for the Micro Four Thirds system, but they're so big, they kind of offset the benefits of using mirrorless, and they're so expensive that you could kind of justify just getting yourself a DSLR and then like a Tamron 70-200 f2.8. Those will also let in more light on a camera with a bigger sensor. So if you get into professional photography, portrait photography, or wedding photography, I'd probably push you into the DSLR world because the lenses for Micro Four Thirds that are capable of it are kind of outrageously priced. Just my opinion. But I still love this for portraits because it is so small and compact. An upgrade from the lens that probably came with your camera is the Olympus 14-150. And it's what they call a super zoom. So it's not the sharpest lens. It's definitely not the fastest lens. It doesn't let in as much light as these primes, but it's a great walking around lens. It's perfect for travel. When I went to Paris, I brought this version of the lens because it allowed me to zoom in tight on faraway things or zoom back to get landscapes. None of those are going to be the highest quality, but for one lens, and if you don't want to change lenses, that's the lens you get. If you want a high quality zoom to replace your kit lens, this is the best choice, the Olympus 12-40 millimeter f2.8. Sturdy, fast, pretty sharp image quality, and just a great feeling lens too. Runs you $1,000 though, it's expensive. If you decide to get a tripod, well, the good news is you don't have to get an Olympus or a Panasonic tripod. Tripods work with any camera. They all have the same screw on the bottom that screws right in. This is the first tripod I recommend to everybody. It goes for about 50 bucks. But this Dolica is lightweight, fully functional and capable. You'll still use this even if you get more serious about photography because it's so lightweight, it makes a great travel tripod. So this is just a great all-around first tripod. That wraps it up. I just want to say once you figure out the buttons and dials on your camera, you should go ahead and start to understand the art and science of photography a little bit deeper because that's going to make a far bigger impact on your photography than just figuring out what f-stop number to use. Photography, unfortunately, is not that simple, but that's part of the fun of it too, figuring out how to take amazing photos. I have 3 separate books and a video training series, all available at sdp.io/store, or just search for my name, Tony Northrup, at Amazon. If you just want more free videos and you don't feel like spending anything, that's fine. Click subscribe and you'll get 3 new videos every week. Absolutely no charge ever for those YouTube videos. We even have a live show on Thursdays where we review your pictures in real time while you're watching them. Pretty cool. And lots of free new tutorials and camera reviews. So click subscribe and please do share it with your friends. If your friend has a different camera, again, send them to sdp.io/tutorials. We might have it covered. Thanks so much.